We're in the season finale of Ruth, chapter 4. Every week we've had this kind of cliffhanger moment. I don't know about you, I love box sets, you know. I love it when you can Netflix binge. We got into Line of Duty just about 6 months ago, and you keep going, we'll go to bed after this one. Then you get to the end and you'll go, we'll watch 5 more minutes, 5 more. And then you realize, you know, at 4:33 a.m. that you just need to go to sleep. And this story, over these 4 weeks has been, every week you're kind of left with this cliffhanger, this moment of what will happen next. And we found that last week. Just a really quick bit of background. We have Ruth and Naomi back from Moab, and they are penniless, they are in poverty, and they have no hope because Naomi's husband has died, Ruth's husband has died, and there's no male heirs in the family. And then Ruth goes out to glean. She finds this guy called Boaz. He's a rich, godly guy, and he looks after her. He's also a kinsman redeemer. If you don't know what that is, please watch one of the previous podcasts on YouTube, because I don't want to go into it again. But basically, he is someone who can keep the land in the family because it was passed through the male heirs. They have their first date. All seems to be going well, and then not a peep from Boaz. After 7 weeks or so, her job gleaning, the harvest is coming to an end, and her mother-in-law is getting a little bit antsy, a little bit concerned, and so desperate times call for desperate measures. And she comes up with some parts of a good plan, and some parts of the plan aren't so good. She says to her daughter-in-law, this is a good advice, wash. That is good advice, wash. Put on a nice dress, spray some Jean Paul Gaultier. That's good advice. Okay, the next bit I'm not so sure about. Go down to the threshing floor where Boaz is having a few beers and some food with the boys. Watch where he falls asleep. And then when it gets dark, go find him and lie at his feet. He will tell you what to do next. I guess he will. And that is not good advice. Remember, that's descriptive, not prescriptive. The youth are in today. I want to tell you that is not what the Bible is telling you to do. Do not housebreak tonight into anybody's house and lie at the foot of anybody's bed. Okay? And so then Boaz wakes up, and Ruth's at his feet. And after he gets over the shock of nearly having a heart attack, he says, what do you want me to do? And she says, you are my kinsman redeemer. Will you redeem me? In other words, I'm not proposing to you. I'm proposing that you propose to me. And that's where we left it last week. Well, we didn't. We left it a little bit after that where Boaz says, actually, I've actually kind of liked you for a while. But there's a problem. There's another guy ahead of me in this kinsman redeemer thing, and I need to check it out. So we're going to find out, do they get engaged or don't they? Last week I was giving the men a hard time about those who have, 17-year engagements. They plan their wedding in 2025. But this week I came across what was apparently in the Guinness Book of Records, the longest engagement ever. Octavia Gillen and don't put the photo up for a minute. Octavia Gillen and Adriana Martinez were engaged in Mexico in 1902, but kept putting the wedding off over and over again. After 67 years, in June 1969, Octavio must have run out of excuses, and the world's longest engagement ended with their vows. They were both 15 years old when they got engaged, and 82 years old on the wedding day. And look how happy they look. I mean, if that doesn't tempt you to get married, I have no idea what will. Honestly. Oh, dear. So we had this cliffhanger last week. If that was the longest engagement, we may find this week that we have the shortest engagement ever. So Boaz said, let me sort it out. Let me deal with it. I will make it happen. And she trusts him. Let's look at verse 1 in chapter 4. Meanwhile, let's just pause there. Meanwhile. So Boaz said the night before, let me sort it out. Then there's a meanwhile. A lot of life is spent in the meanwhile, isn't it? We love highlights. That's why we watch Match of the Day. That's why we don't like ads. We like highlights, but a lot of life is spent in the meanwhile. The meanwhile of waiting. The meanwhile of waiting for things that are not in your control. You get test results and they come back in a week. That's the meanwhile. You're trying for a child, but nothing's happening. That's the meanwhile. You have a sick parent and you don't know if they're going to get better. That's the meanwhile. You're trying to get a job and you've applied for it and you're thinking, you're feeling good about it because you've got everything they've asked, but you haven't heard from them. That's the meanwhile. A lot of life is spent in the meanwhile. A lot of life is out of our hands. And all we can do in the meanwhile is be faithful and trust. That's all we can do. Be faithful and trust. Very often we're waiting for the answer to a decision that will affect our future, but it's out of our hands. And the Lord would just say, be faithful where you are and trust, because when you're in the meanwhile, every possibility from the best case scenario to the worst case scenario goes through your head and everything in between. And I wonder what Ruth and Naomi talked about that night. Ruth goes home and tells Naomi everything that's going on. And one way or the other, she's going to be married. That's the thing. There's another kinsman redeemer. She's either going to be married to the other one or she's going to be married to the guy she loves. And she doesn't know which one. But she's living in the meanwhile. And maybe today you're living in the meanwhile. You're living in that waiting space, that place where you're not sure what's going to happen. And I would say to you, just be faithful where you are and keep trusting God that he will work things out. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. He doesn't waste time, Boaz. Boaz doesn't take 3 weeks to think this through. Next morning, he phones his PA, says, "Cancel all my appointments for today. I've got something to do." He goes down to the town gate. The town gate is where the most important meetings took place. They didn't have a town hall. They didn't have a courthouse. So this was where the important people gathered, where there was a legal issue, where there was a commercial or financial issue to be sorted out. You did it at the town gate. It was the most prominent place in the community where people entered and left. And Boaz goes down there because he's got some important business to take care of. And it's not long, it says, before the other guy comes along, the other kinsman redeemer. We don't know his name. We'll call him Mr. No Name. I tried to think of a name in the first service that I didn't like, and I came up with the name Jeremy for some reason. And I kept calling him Jeremy. I have no idea why. But I'm not going to do that in case there's a Jeremy here. And I'm not trying to influence anything politically whatsoever. I have absolutely no, I don't care about it. But if Jeremy Corbyn ends up at PM, you'll be looking at a new minister next week. Anyway, let me move on. We'll use the first service in the podcast. Boaz goes down to the gate. He's a guy who keeps his word. He said to Ruth, "I will sort it out." And he sorts it out. He's a guy who keeps his word. He's trustworthy, he's honest, he's dependable, and he is reliable. And how we need in this generation of snowflakes people who are honest, dependable, reliable, and trustworthy. And can I say, this is what I love about this church and the people who serve here. That exemplifies you. I never sit on a Saturday night saying, "Becky, I wonder will the worship team, I wonder will the tea and coffee team, I wonder will the kids team show up, I wonder will the visual guy." You are faithful. You are honorable. You keep your word. If you can't be here, you find someone who does it. That is honestly so precious. That's precious to me as a pastor. Can I say, if anybody is an employer, that is precious to them. To have people who are reliable, dependable, trustworthy, and honest will get you promoted more than most things today. Because most people are flaky, unreliable, untrustworthy, and dishonest. And if you have those qualities, I promise you the Lord will bless you and you will do well in life. Keep your word. Jesus said, "Let your yes be yes and let your no be no." Be someone who keeps their word. Look at verses 2-4. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Boaz seems to be quite a confident, strong guy. In fact, I read this week his grandfather was kind of a military hero. He was from a family that would have been very well respected. So he calls 10 of the elders. He says, "Guys, sit down. I'm about to do something." Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, Mr. No Name, he said, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I'm next in line. So Boaz calls these respected men, these town councillors, as witnesses. And he wants to do things right. He wants to follow the protocol. He's not trying to cut corners. He's not trying to pull a fly one. He wants to do things all above board so nobody can come back later and accuse him of doing wrong. So he adjourns this little court in the town gate. And what goes on there is going to be legally binding. And he explains to Mr. No Name all that has happened. How Naomi's husband died and her sons died. And this land that belonged to Elimelech can't be passed to her sons. You see, when Israel went into the promised land, God gave them the land of Canaan. They split it up among the 12 tribes, and then the 12 tribes split it up among the clans, and the clans split up among the families. So every single family had their little square of land, okay? That's all you had. That was yours. That was where you could farm. That was where you could build a house. Everything you had depended on your little square of land. But it could only be passed down through the male line. And if there was no male heir to pass it on to, it would be forfeited. And so Naomi has no sons left. She has no grandsons. And so it's going to be passed on unless there is someone in the family line who can step in and redeem it. And that's what's going on here. And so he says, look, she's now destitute. Your first dibs, Mr. No Name. Do you want it? And look at what Mr. No Name says in verse 4. He says, I will redeem it. No. And that's the end. Let's pray together. No, but I mean, like that would be one of those moments where you're thinking, nightmare, this is not what we want to happen. It's all over. Mr. No Name wants the land. He gets Ruth. Good try, Boaz. It didn't work out. Or is it over? Because Boaz just forgot to mention. He didn't lie. He just hasn't told the whole story yet. He says, also with the land, there comes something else. Well, someone else. Well, someone's else. He says there's Naomi, the widow of Elimelech. She comes with, but she's fine because she's an older lady. She's past childbearing age, nothing to worry about. You know, look after her for a while and she'll be fine. But there's also this girl that's from Moab called Ruth, and she is childbearing age. And actually your job as a kinsman redeemer is to provide her with a male heir so that the land stays in Elimelech's family. Oh, Mr. No Name was not expecting that. Boaz is a good negotiator, isn't he? He's very good. My wife is a terrible negotiator. Aren't you? I remember, right, in Dublin we had been looking for a house for like 6 months. Yeah. Okay, we eventually found the perfect house. The agent is walking us through it. She hasn't decided how much the rent is going to be yet, okay? Becky walks in and literally, I guess like tears start streaming down her. She's like, I love it. And the estate agent's going cha-ching, cha-ching. And I'm walking around being a bit of a tire kicker. A few things not happy, a few tiles cracked there and everything like that. And so I'm trying to bring the price down and Becky is like bringing it up by, and sometimes you need to just not tell, you don't lie. Sometimes you just don't need to tell them everything up front. And that's what Boaz's negotiation was here. He told him something that he couldn't refuse, and then he said, well, actually, there's another price attached to it. And Mr. No Name goes no way because he's already got family. And actually, imagine if he takes on Ruth and they have a bunch of kids, a bunch of boys. All that he already owns now gets divided among all of them as well as his own family. And he decides this is not worth the risk. Like the grumpy mother-in-law, I can handle. The young girl who may have loads of kids, no way, it is not worth the risk. Plus, he's probably married, and his wife might not be damn about the idea of a few more women moving in with him. Some women are funny about that sort of thing. So Mr. No Name, afraid of losing what he has, says, Boaz, You take the land, you take the grumpy mother-in-law, and if you want the pagan Ruth girl, she's all yours. Go for it, big lad. Yes, Boaz, you have sealed the deal. So here's where he does it. We get this little side note about how business took place in verses 7 to 12. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, this is weird. One party took his sandal off and gave it to the other. We don't know if it was just like you handed it and then you took it back, or that you handed it and they kept it and you hopped off home. Well, it doesn't say that. This was a method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess. He's proud to say this. Mahlon's widow as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead. In other words, you weren't willing to pay the price. I'm willing to pay the cost for that girl because she is worth it. With his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses. Then the elders and all those at the gate said, we are witnesses. Now, they could have left it there, but they do this beautiful thing. They pronounce this blessing. They declare this blessing over him. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah were the wives of Jacob, and they were the mothers of the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons who were the 12 tribes of Israel. May your woman be like, come into the home like the house of Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May your standing in Ephrathah be as famous in Bethlehem. And didn't Bethlehem become famous, even though it was unknown barely at that time? Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman. Notice the faith. She had been married for 10 years, Ruth had, and didn't have a kid. They're already starting to speak. You're going to have a kid. May the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Wow, what a beautiful blessing. Speak blessing over people. Speak blessing over your family. Speak biblical blessing over your kids at night. There's something powerful about words, and there's something powerful about declaring scripture and the Lord's goodness and favor over people's lives. But they didn't have a contract printed up, so they do this thing with the sandal. So Mr. No Name takes off his Nike Air Jordan and gives it to Boaz and hops off home. And Boaz says to the elders, you're all witnesses, and they pronounce the blessing. Yep. We're all witnesses, and may the Lord give you lots of bambinos. And verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Now, I am sure for some of you in here, this seems like an anticlimax. 4 chapters, and we get one line about the marriage. Not even a line, half a line, and the other half a line about having a baby. Like, where's all the fuss? And she went and she picked a dress, and then she didn't like it, so she brought it back, and and she had a bridesmaid, but then she fell out with the bridesmaid, and she had to get, no, you know why? Because it's not about the wedding, it's about being married for these two. There's 2 types of couples that you marry. There's one type of couple that it's all about the wedding day. And I have friends who 3 years on, every photo on Facebook is still their wedding day. It was lovely, but we don't need to see it. And then there's others who are just like, we just want to be married. We don't care. We'll get married in a shed. We'll get married we'll go to Vegas. We'll go, whatever. We just want to be married. That's what Ruth and Boaz, they just wanted to be married. They didn't have a big fuss about it. It was all about just being together. And very quickly, this girl who wasn't able to conceive with her first husband, she gives birth to a son, which was exactly what she needed to keep the land in the family. Let's catch our breath. Let's reflect for a moment. Think about Ruth's life. Think of just a few weeks ago, if I had said describe Ruth, you'd have described her as a foreigner, an outcast, someone with a bad reputation from a place that had a bad name. She was a single widow, a childless widow. She really had no hope and she was helpless. Now, how would you describe her? She's Ruth, the wife of Boaz, the godly, rich, respected landowner, and the mother of a lovely wee baby boy called Obed. She's Mrs. Boaz. She's got a whole new identity because of the one who redeemed her. What a lovely story of romance and redemption and kindness and grace. You know, they say that opposites attract. I'm not sure that's true. Science actually proves that we tend to be most attracted to people who are like us rather than people who are different than us. In fact, some couples even look alike. And if they don't, when they mate, the longer they're together, sometimes the more they start to look alike. Some of you will have seen those couples who are in their 60s or 70s and they look so similar. And I was going through celebrity couples who look alike. And here's a few. I don't even know all their names, okay? But you can decide, do these couples look alike to you? That's Justin and Hailey. I'm not sure. They say they look alike. These magazines and whatever think these couples all look alike. Keep going. Courtney Cox, and I think you can see it a little bit there. Chin, yeah. Nicole and Keith Urban. His hair is better than hers, actually. I just have to say. Keep going. Benedict, Benedict, I'll just call him. They look alike. Keep going. Those two from that thing, who aren't together anymore, so I guess the compatibility wasn't so great there. Scarlett Johansson and her slightly nervous-looking husband. Keep going. I mean, yeah, if you get up close to her, she's got a beard. Okay, no, I'm only joking. But they actually do. But you know, they look a little bit alike, and those two. I mean, they could be twins. That is a married couple, by the way. I'm leaving you with that thought for the day. But, you know, there's a few different theories on why this happens. I was going to say take that down. One is that we're so narcissistic and in love with ourselves that we fall in love with people who look like us. That's one theory, but the more scientific one is that facial characteristics actually tell us something about people's personalities. That by looking at somebody's face, you can often tell what kind of personality they have. And so some people have a happy face. And so if you have a happy face and they have a happy face, there's a good chance that you'll be attracted to each other because you want to be around other happy, friendly people. We generally tend to be attracted to people and to attract people who are like us. What has all of this got to do with the story of Ruth, I hear you ask? And I'm glad you did ask. Because as I was studying this week and thinking through the story, I made a list of character traits of Boaz. And I made a list of character traits of Ruth. And even though their backgrounds are so different, and even though their social standing could not be more different, it's amazing when you look at their character and their heart, how similar they were. Boaz was a godly man. Ruth was a godly woman. Boaz was incredibly kind to Ruth even when there was absolutely nothing in it for him to begin with. Ruth was incredibly kind to Naomi even though there was nothing in it for her. Boaz was a hard-working man. He owned fields. He employed people. Ruth was a hard-working woman, laboring from morning to evening to provide for Naomi and herself. Boaz had a moral purity about him. He refused to take advantage of Ruth. And Boaz describes Ruth as being morally pure. He says, you could have had any guy you want, and yet you have chosen not to. Ruth was a girl who stuck to her commitments. When she said she would never leave Naomi, she meant it. Boaz was the same. He said, Ruth, I will take care of things by tomorrow morning, and he did it. Even though there was an age difference between them, what attracted them was probably not how they looked. It was their character. There was something about the qualities that they saw in each other that said, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You are someone I know I can trust, someone I want to be with. We have similar characteristics. You know, so many young people talk about meeting the one. Can I say, first of all, there is no the one, okay? If there was the one, if one person gets that wrong, that screws it up for the entire planet, okay? So there's you know who the one is? The one you marry, okay? That is the one. But there's a lot of people you can be happy with. But when you are married, that's the one, okay? But people talk about meeting the one, and if these checklists, I want them to look like this, I want them with this type of job, I want them to earn this, or I want them to be like this. And they checklist, and they meet somebody, and they check them off, and okay, he gets 8 out of 10 or whatever. Can I say what's more important than finding the one is being the one? So yes, have your checklist, and then ask yourself, would somebody like that want to be with somebody like me? Because do all of those things, if you're looking for somebody generous and you're a stingy old git, really? Are they going to be attracted to you? If you're looking for somebody happy and you're a miserable sod, so rather than having this list of things that you're looking in somebody else, why not look at that list and go, if I were to meet them, would they be attracted to me by the quality of my character right now? And that's not just about relationships and romance. That's in every part of life. We tend to attract people who are like us. Birds of a feather flock together. Misery loves company. Those sayings are sayings for a reason. We tend to attract people who are similar to us. And so if you look at your friendship circle and you look at the people around you and you go, I don't like any of them, you might want to look in the mirror and ask yourself why you keep attracting these type of people. There's nothing wrong with setting standards, but ask yourself this: would I want to be with me? Becky asked me that 2 weeks ago. She said, Craig, would you want to be married to you? And what was my answer? No way. I said, I know I'm hard work, okay? I'm a work in progress, and she's a godly woman, and so we're good. But we have a lot of commonalities. And when you meet somebody who you have that character connection with, when it's more than just they're hot, they're attractive, when there's something about them that's very special, that I don't see in everybody out there, that's when real connection happens. So instead of looking for the one, young people in here, be the one. Anyway, let's finish up, verses 14 to 17. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. What a change has taken place in just a few short chapters. Chapter 1, Naomi comes back and she says, don't call me Naomi because Naomi means pleasant. Call me Mara because Mara means bitter, for the Lord has made my life bitter. And you know what? In that moment, she was telling the truth from her reality in that moment. But now, they're not calling her bitter, they're calling her blessed. See, here's the thing. When she was speaking back then, she was speaking from her wounds, not from her scars. And this is really important advice. When you're giving your testimony of what God has done in your life, or when you're sharing about what God has done, don't speak from your wounds, speak from your scars. In other words, don't speak from that place where things are still an open wound, where things are really raw, where there's so much emotion still attached to it. But later on, when God has done his work of healing, when God has turned things around, when things are better, that's your testimony. And don't hide your scars. Cover your wounds and protect them, but don't hide your scars, because your scars tell a story. I read a lovely story just this week about a teenager in the south, actually. She's 19. She's Aoife Lovett. And she'd been struggling with mental health all throughout her teenage years, and she had turned to self-harming. And her arms were covered in scars, and she was so embarrassed about them. And after she'd come through some of that and come through the other side and found relief from that, every time she looked at her arms, she was embarrassed, especially around her family. They were a reminder of the pain of her past. And so she wanted to get a tattoo, and she went to different tattoo places, and none of them would do it. But then she found one place called Scars Behind Beauty, run by a guy called Ryan Kelly. And it's an initiative that helps people leave self-harm behind them with cover-up tattoos. Ryan launched his tattoo cover-up project in February. This is just last year, when another woman contacted him for the same reason Aoife did. A girl just randomly came in, he says, looking for a tattoo to cover up some scars. And I got talking to her and she started telling me her story. Ryan said, at the end of that, it didn't really feel right to charge her. It kind of felt like the self-harm tattoo cover-up meant more to her than that. But this is what he said. The best tattoo cover-up is putting something beautiful over something ugly. I thought, what a wonderful line. The best cover-up tattoo is to put something beautiful over something ugly. If you put it here. Now, you'll all have different ideas about what you think of it. But if you look, you can see the scars on her arm. But now she looks down and she sees something that she thinks is beautiful. The best tattoo is to take your scars, and your scars don't go away, but put something beautiful over them. So that when you look down, you don't remember the wounds and the scars. You think about the beauty. And that's a picture here of what has happened in Naomi's life and Ruth's life. Because you will have wounds. And you will have scars. You can't go through life without having wounds and scars. But what the Lord is able to do, if you will let him, is to paint something beautiful, paint a tapestry of grace and goodness over those things. You see, look at what they say. This was a verse that stood out for me. It said this, if in the last slide before that one, Mal, if you just put up, the women living there said, Naomi has a son. Does Naomi have a son? No, Ruth has a son. But it's as if Naomi has a son. See, Naomi's husband died. He's not coming back. Her sons died. They're not coming back. And there are some losses that you will have that you can't change. That's just the reality of life. There's some things that you can't bring back. Our Lord restores, but there are some things that he can't bring back because they're gone forever. But then there's other things that he can't bring back, but he can make restitution for. That you lost something or someone very precious to you and you cannot replace them, but he will give you restitution. He will demonstrate and exemplify his goodness in other ways. And for Naomi, she may have had great losses and she may have a lot of scars. But as she looks down at this little baby in her arm, do you think she sees her scars or do you think she sees the Lord's goodness? Such a picture of grace. Such a picture of God's goodness. She thought her life was over. She thought that God was against her. She thought that God had abandoned her. Far from it. God was at work behind the scenes, fulfilling his purpose. And you know, the first verse in Ruth, the very first verse, Ruth 1:1 says this. It was in the time of the judges, which was the darkest time in Israel's history, where it said each person did what was right in their own eyes. Do you know what the very last verse does? It introduces King David, which was the most glorious time in Israel's history. And the bridge between the worst time and the most glorious time was the story of this girl called Ruth. And she didn't realize that her little story was part of a much bigger story. In the middle of all the mess and the loss and the grief and the heartache and the famine and all of that, little did she know that her little story is part of a much bigger story. And I want to say to you that your little story is important, and God is deeply and intricately interested in every aspect of your life. But never think that your life and your story is all that there is. Your little story is connected to a bigger story. And what I'm trying to say is this: your life is about more than just you. Because Ruth gave birth to Obed. Obed gave birth to Jesse. Jesse gave birth to David. And if you keep going down the family tree, in Matthew chapter 1, you get to Jesus. And this is not just about you. This is about the people around you. This is about your children, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-great-grandchildren. This is about more than you. Never think your life is just about you. Ruth had no idea that she was going to be in the line of the Messiah. I mean, who would have thunk it? And yet God was able to do that. And when we allow our little story to be part of his big story, life takes on meaning and life takes on purpose. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus came as our Redeemer through his love and kindness and grace. He didn't have to pay the cost. He could have been like Mr. No Name and said, nah, it costs too much. But he said, yeah, I love her and I'm willing to pay the price. And he redeemed us, not with money, but with his precious blood. He has drawn us with his love. He has taken us as his bride, the church, and he has taken away our shame, and he has given you a new name, a new identity, a new label, and that is that you belong to him. Look at what Ephesians 1 says. In Christ we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace that he lavished on us. You and I are part of his story. I want to finish with a story here. Recently in Bedford, Virginia, a Jeep crashed, causing 6 passengers to be thrown from the vehicle. The injuries sustained were so extensive that one of the adults and a small child had to be airlifted to the hospital. The other survivors from the accident were taken by ambulance to the nearest trauma centre. All but one were accounted for. A small infant, just a few weeks old, couldn't be found. The survivors knew it was unlikely the baby survived. If the impact of the accident didn't kill him, then being thrown out of the vehicle so violently probably did. When the fire department arrived at the scene to determine the quickest way to clean up the debris from the accident, they were also hoping that they would find the baby's remains so that they could give the family some closure. What they found stunned everyone. As they were lifting the remaining wreckage, they heard the cries of a baby. Trapped under the front of the large Jeep was the car seat the infant had been strapped into at the beginning of the journey. Still secured into the car seat, frightened but unharmed, was the baby they thought could never have survived. From all accounts, he should have been dead, permanently injured or drastically scarred. Yet somehow the baby was spared. And then the book I was reading it in said this: if someone examined your life and wrote all the details of your collisions on paper, others might think your chances of survival were slim to none. Yet here you are. God has spared you and placed your life on reserve. Your collision was never intended to kill you, so do not let it. Long before your journey began, God strapped you in and promised to protect you from even the most horrific of tragedies. Perhaps at times you stopped trusting him to see you through and allowed fear to unharness the hold he has on your life, yet you are still here. And this is proof that he has not given up on you, so you cannot give up on him. We all have our fair share of collisions. There have been moments that it has felt unlikely we would get through or survive, yet here we are. We may be bruised, but we keep fighting. We may get burned, but we won't be consumed. We may be afraid, but we won't stop living. We may have to bend, but we will never break, because he that is in us is greater than he that is in the world.